classes, and you know how that goes. So we should have more robust participation soon. So would you be okay to start, Ananth? And maybe you want to share your screen, and then I can start the intro, and then we can take it from there. Okay. Yeah. Do you have any videos to play, Ananth, or is it mostly these slides?
Yeah, just these slides. Maybe one slide has a little bit of animation, but that's it.
Okay. Then I think they look good. Yeah. Okay. So let's start. Okay. And hopefully people will join us. Yeah. So it's really our pleasure, the ICICLE Institute's pleasure to invite Professor Ananth Kalyanaraman to come and deliver this a talk, which mostly describes the AgAID AI Institute. So Ananth is a professor and Boeing Centennial's chair in computer science at Washington State University, located in Pullman, Washington. Ananth, wears many hats. So he's a very versatile and prolific researcher. He holds a joint position with the Pacific Northwest National Lab, like our one of our favorite colleagues, Sadayapan. And he also holds affiliate positions at Washington State University's Molecular Plant Sciences graduate program. He's also part of the Paul G. Allen School for Global Animal Health. By the way, I did not know there was such a institute that Paul Allen actually underwrote. So Ananth works in scalable data science. He cares a lot about problems of and applications of data science in the interface of high performance computing, graph analytics, and computational life sciences. Very importantly, once again, is the lead and director of the NSF and NIFA, AgAID Institute. In this talk, he's going to talk more about he's going to present an overview, right, of the institute, its goals and mission, and also describe and provide some details, right? Details about their approaches and methodologies. Their projects are different than the ones we have for digital agriculture. It'll be really useful to know what they are, and of course engage in a conversation so that we can find bridges to connect between ICICLE and AgAID AI Institute. Welcome again, Ananth, and please take it forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raghu. So I hope you can hear me fine, right?
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So it is really my pleasure to give this seminar. I want to keep it a bit at a high level with open for discussion along the way. So please feel free to interject at any moment if you have any questions, clarifications. I would like to cover what we are doing at the Institute, at the AgAID Institute. It was started last year, 2021. We just did our first year review, and so the gamut of problems that we cover, particularly in the application space, is somewhat different from the other three AI institutes that are also focused on agriculture, and I'll touch upon that. I also, like Raghu mentioned, very curious to find out where possible bridges are when it comes to ICICLE and AgAID collaborations. Like you mentioned, I do wear a few hats, one of them being HPC, and I'm very curious to know what kind of methodologies, frameworks, workflows that we can possibly think of developing in a collaborative manner, but focused on some agricultural use cases. So here is a rough slide on like who we are. So AgAID is basically a 10-member consortium. Washington State University, which is where I am, is the lead on the institute. We have Oregon State, University of California, Merced, and University of Virginia. So this quartet is really where all the research is focused on. We do have a partner at Carnegie Mellon Robotics Institute, and also we have two industry partners, IBM Research and Innovate Ag, which is basically a farm tech company based out of the Pacific Northwest. We also have several educational partners, minority serving institutes, and also we have an external evaluator. So what we are trying to essentially accomplish at this institute is basically ask the simple question: how can AI help agriculture secure food production for the future? This is a very generic question, but we are answering, or we are trying to address this question in a somewhat focused manner, thematically, or as we call them, thrusts. So one particular topic that we are really interested in is figuring out how water as a scarce resource can be marshaled, and how it can be allocated to different regions. And that requires really understanding how water plays a role in agriculture. And more than 87% of water use in the nation is actually towards agriculture. And so really figuring out how to understand water allocation, drought, implications on agriculture, farming decisions, all that is important. And that's what that's one challenge that we focus on. The other is on the impacts of weather, and several of the crops that we are actually looking at are very finicky or very sensitive to weather fluctuations and changes, and I'll touch upon a few of them in this talk. But how can farmers basically make decisions, real-time decisions, and in a way that's data informed and also science guided, is a key question here. The third being the automation and labor. So labor is actually a very integral part of a lot of agricultural use cases. In fact, you can't really take them out. So it requires working with the workforce in a very integral manner. And I'll come to that, and what degree of automation is possible, what degree of automation is not possible. And farmers are really reliant on this, on the labor part, but also they are looking forward to some kind of automated solutions to the extent possible. So I covered three different things: water, weather, and labor. And what we are basically focusing on as from the agriculture side is for this institute is specialty crops. Specialty crops basically encompass all these three challenges. When I say specialty crops, for those of you who may not be familiar, I'm talking of horticultural crops like apples, cherries, or tree fruits, wine grapes, berries, and then nut trees like almonds and pistachios, and all these crops. In fact, just in the state of Washington, we grow more than 300 different types of crops, which are specialty crops. And then we have a significant fraction of the agricultural workforce employed in the specialty crop industry. This is across the nation. It accounts for about 87% of the agricultural workforce. And also, they are grown on irrigated lands. They heavily rely on water. And so that basically touches upon basically labor and water. The impact of weather also is very prominent here. In fact, more than 40% of these crops are perennial systems, which really means if any damage that happens in the crop due to weather, the farmers have to basically they have multiple years of impact because these are perennial crops and they don't have the luxury of planting it year by year. So this basically motivates us to focus on specialty crops as our key test bed and try to develop hopefully sophisticated and useful models across all these three different spectrums. So in that vein, I would like to talk about how we envision AI, but more specifically agricultural AI, as we talk about it. So what should it look like? What key components it should encompass? At a high level, we would like the AI systems to basically understand really the complex system that they are working with or trying to model. And we know that these complex systems are non-stationary, they could change, they have multiple scales. Also, we don't have a clear understanding necessarily about the rewards and the competency levels. There's a lot of uncertainties. So these are all basically the key challenges that the AI system should actually embrace as part of their model development. The other key integral part of the AI systems that we develop is to do with human-AI partnership. In other words, understanding what humans are good at and understanding what AI is good at and figuring out where they can partner in a productive way so that there is an amplification of the outcomes is so important in this space. The third part that's so important is AI also has to not just understand individual humans who are possibly the workforce, but also understand what the community is like. The agricultural community is very diverse. And so figuring out how the community, what the community needs and what flavors these tools need to be produced, socioeconomic factors that dictate adoption. So these are all so important when it comes to adoption of the AI tools. And there's no point actually developing a tool in the space if it can't be adopted. So in some sense, these are the three major AI focal elements that we would like to basically address, and the end product of like the models developed, the suite of the tools is what we can call as agricultural AI. There might be other issues, but these are certainly some of the important ones. So our overall approach to the institute is defined by this mantra of adopt, adapt, and amplify. So very briefly, what that really means is any tool that we develop, we should basically think of adoption of those tools as the first design principle, not just wait until the tool is developed and then figure out who is going to use it. The second is adaptability and how it can adapt to different environments, different crop systems, different scales. All those are very important part of the tools that we are developing. The third part is really the amplification part, which basically talks about the human AI partnership. So this, as you can tell, will involve a lot of stakeholder engagement. When I say stakeholders, I'm not only talking of agricultural researchers and users of the system, decision makers, but I'm also talking of AI designers. I think we also need to understand that the AI designers really need to understand what the underlying use cases are as they are developing the tools here. So what this means is we have like three major thrusts: water intelligence, farm intelligence, and labor intelligence. I'll go into some of the details of these, but we have basically organized our institute activities around these three themes. Even though these are agriculturally motivated or ag-inspired themes, they do have direct connection to the underlying AI thrust that we have, which is to do with the modeling of systems of knowns and unknowns, also making real-time decision support with using on multi-scale site-specific manner, and also the third one being basically the interactive human AI workflows and inclusive workflows as well. So all these three play in all these three different actors. As a result, what we have done in the first year is basically focus on water intelligence, farm intelligence, and labor intelligence as our three major research thrusts, which encompass agriculture and AI elements all in an integrated fashion. So with that, I'll briefly talk about what we are doing across these three trusts, some sample projects and so on. Here is a very high eagle's eye view of what we are doing in the research landscape. So it's a busy figure, but it will be easier if you read it from left to right. So the left panel basically shows, think of this as being spatial resolution. The water challenge is really a regional scale challenge. Decisions of water allocation, how water flows through the watersheds, how much water is available, where the irrigation systems are, how much, what is the consumptive use of water, how the farms are using the water. Everything is at the regional scale, and we would like to basically model that at that spatial resolution here. There's also temporal resolution involved. The next set of challenges to do with farm intelligence is more site-specific. So if you have go to any farmers in this area, you'll have basically a lot of blocks that grow different kinds of crops. And so we are talking about making decisions or providing decision support system at that scale here: smart orchards, smart vineyards, smart blueberry farms, and things like that. And then the third spatial resolution, the class of problems, is to do with how a human directly interacts with a particular crop. It's at that scale. And so this requires a lot of computer vision, imaging, robotics, manipulations, and those kinds of challenges here. So this is basically left to right, from coarse to fine spatial resolution. We are also looking at problems which are at a different temporal resolution. And mainly, if you understand, we are basically focused on when basically throughout the growing season, and these are mostly perennial crops that we are looking at. And so we are looking at what happens prior to the season, the decisions, some of them that are made as before the crop starts to really take off in spring. Some operations are needed there. And those might influence down the road how the crop is going to grow, how much yield is going to be there, and all the different other implications. And then we also studies many of the decisions during the growing season and then all the way to the harvest. So that's in a nutshell what we are trying to do at the Institute. So let me talk a little bit about the water intelligence part. So, water, as you know, in most of the countries available through watersheds, and in the state of Washington, we have like at least most of the water is basically surface water, and that really means that we have to understand what is the snow cover forecast for the season, and that talks about the water supply. So there's plenty of modeling tools, forecasting tools available to forecast the supply of water. What is really not available is really the to understand how much water will really be available. So the water supply is slightly different from water availability. Water availability refers to how much water will be available at what time and where, right? And throughout the season. So we want really seasonal forecasts so that farmers and also water irrigation districts can make decisions ahead of the time ahead of the growing season, and also they might be able to readily adapt their decisions as the season progresses. And so that's really what we would like to see. We would like a transition happening in the type of decisions made from water supply to water availability. And what this really entails is basically not only understand the biophysical models on how climate and weather influences how much water will be available at the start of the season, but also we need to understand human influence, the decisions made by humans who are farmers or irrigation district. And so this requires that human biophysical coupled systems. That's the kind of modeling that this particular thrust involves. And there's a gamut of use cases here. I'll not go into the details of them. I'll go into at least maybe one or two like example projects that we have here to give you an idea. This is a diverse team. It's got team from basically biosystems engineering, computer science, complexity, and so a lot of modeling, understanding basically like how models can be integrated with data and observations. So some of those challenges will be visible here, and I'll go into one project at least specifically in this slide. The farm intelligence, as I talked about, basically is to do with the site-specific decisions. And this is where use of sensor data, drones or imaging that happens on the farm, any kind of sensor readings like weather data, all those things come to the fore. Because we want to be understanding how the crops are responding to the microclimate that they are exposed to. And one use case project that we are focused on is frost mitigation. Which is to do with basically if a frost happens a late fall or during the harvest time, that could basically imply loss of yield. Or if it happens at the start of spring when the flowers are starting to emerge, it could basically lead to flower damage, and hence it has a bearing on the particular yield. Farmers have to react quickly, and they have to basically come up with what you see on the left hand side is basically heating that's used in farms, or it can be large wind machines, or it can be irrigation. This is to bring up the temperature in the farms if there is going to be a frost that's forecast. So these are expensive.
This is really cool. I didn't know that these things would happen. This is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find if you go to farms here, if you drive through, you'll find large wind machines, gas heating, electric heating.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like sometimes this picture particularly, I think, is taken from Europe somewhere, but this is a vineyard, I think, in Spain or someplace. But it's not far away from what we do here, right?
I thought initially you were showing some forest fire, right? It was playing in your previous. This is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. This is actually to bring the temperature up so that the crops don't get exposed to frost.
And I think in some places I've also heard this cover the crops with hay that increases the heat instead of firing.
Yeah, right.
Especially tea estates.
So, Ananth, then is the lighting of the fires all done in an adaptive way as needed, or is this somebody goes and lights the fires?
So there were farms out in the Pacific Northwest where they would have row by row, and I still see the remnants of those where they would actually go and light the fires. And I think they are by and large defunct. Now, I do see these propane gases every row. There's propane gas, and so there's a fuel. I think they are still not controlled. More used are the wind machines these days because you can control them. You have apps, and basically there will be X number of wind machines in a farm, and you basically turn them on and off, and you can do it like block by block and so on, right? They cover a good number of rows. So this is what is actually more used. I think the heating is more for perhaps. I think it's hopefully it's more outdated now. So
okay, I see. Interesting.
Irrigation is so you can actually turn on the sprinklers. They have mist that sprays from the top of the canopy, and you turn that on. Then basically it can maintain the temperature, so the frost doesn't really percolate the canopy and does not damage. Yeah. The other kind of decision that happens is how much to irrigate, when to irrigate. Interestingly, actually, for crops like apples and so on, of course, you don't want to starve the plant by not giving it water, right? And so that makes sense. But for grapes, it's the opposite problem. Actually, it makes sense to reduce the water use. Like if you reduce it too low, of course, the plants will die, right? But if there's a threshold there, you keep reducing the water, and basically what that means is the plant figures out what is the right way to actually use that water, or utilize the water made available to it. And then basically it improves the quality of the grape, and which is more important for wine grapes. Quality is more important than actually the quantity. And so deficit irrigation, as we call it, is like how much can you turn down the water levels on a daily basis and still be able to meet your yield demands, but improve the quality, right? And so that requires us understanding what the plant is doing, but also understanding like as a if you there could be water loss along these drip irrigation lines and stuff like that, right? So we really need to understand the dynamics of actually the water flow that's happening within a farm too. Within a block of a farm. So that's another use case we are looking at. The third is harvest management. This is actually more linked to the labor side of things, but there's also an operation side of things where how much to employ harvesting equipment and workforce at what part of the farm and which requires. So especially when it comes to weather, like in fact, I was in a farm last week or 2 weeks back, and it was basically the last day of harvest, and the snow is coming. You could tell that the snow is in the mountains there, and they were looking at it, and they were like scrambling their resources to make sure the best part of their farms basically are picked, where the yield is the better, higher quality or higher priced apples basically that they can pick in the farm. So that was happening in a real-time basis, and it was really exciting to see that. So,
Ananth, can I ask a question? I really found the frost mitigation. So I think deficit irrigation and harvest management are reflective of what people have been looking at in sort of this digital agriculture, precision agriculture space, right? How do I adapt? How do I create technologies that are adaptive to conditions? The first one is really interesting to me because you're creating technology to change the conditions, right? It's almost like doing a rain dance, right? Like if you could, you would do. I find that fascinating. I think my question is, are you guys looking at the consequences of frost mitigation, right? Because now you're changing over large areas the temperature distribution, which the simplest is it may affect the farm next to me. If for instance, you start blowing cold air it's got a lot of microclimate effects.
It does have a lot of microclimate effect. In fact, there is a spatio-temporal problem there of modeling the individual farms and figuring out how the micro weather in one farm actually affects the other. We do have actually a large agricultural mesonet. It's basically called AgWeatherNet. It's a network of weather stations which are basically located very nearby farms to monitor what's going on in individual farms. And each farm could grow different kinds of crops. So it's not just, okay, how much temperature is there in one farm, but also figuring out, okay, is this particular apple variety in this part of the farm going to be affected more than the other variety in the same farm? Because some varieties are very sensitive, perhaps more so than the others. So it's even that the challenge that you just talked about also is there at the farm scale for us. A single farm doesn't have to even reach out to the neighboring farms. So we are first, at least for this problem, we are currently focusing on how to basically understand how hardy a particular crop is to frost. So we call this cold hardiness modeling. And that's cold hardiness is an attribute of a particular variety and how it responds to cold weather. And we can actually track it and model it throughout the season, right? And so even during the peak winter, the crop has to be really hardy. And some varieties are more hardy than the others. And so we are trying to definitely understand cold hardiness first, predict how hardy a crop is. And then the next phase in our projects is to use that information to provide feedback into the individual farms for the control aspect, which is where the actual use of these machinery comes into play. Currently, growers are hesitant to directly adopt tools and recommendations. They would not, if I go and tell them, okay, the tool says, turn on these fans and shut off these fans. That's like a big investment for them. They have invested thousands of dollars in the machinery. They're not going to just do that. But we need to give them information to help understand, if you actually turn this on, this is how much the loss is going to be quantified, with a certain uncertainty associated with it, right? We say, okay, so we may not be sure about the predicted levels of damage, but here is the uncertainty level, and basically let the growers decide based on those levels. And so, yeah, so this is actually every problem that we see here has all those attributes. That's why we have to work very closely with the underlying growers, and we do have actually a set of very excited collaborative growers in our institute who are actually providing us data. They are providing us space to experiment some of our tools.
Well, Ananth, you think very positively. I think you could also use the same models, the same frost hardiness models, to help your growers determine who they should sue in terms of who's ruining their crops from abroad. Maybe I shouldn't go there. Thank you. This is very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, again, this is a diverse team. I just wanted to acknowledge the team here. I'm presenting an overview of multiple different problems happening at the different levels of the institute here. The third is actually the labor part, which is automation, but not all automation. Let me elaborate on that. So in California, our Merced group is looking at almonds, pistachios, and there is a use case there where they actually go and shake the tree. What you see is a tree shaker. An operator operates the tree shaker, and this is the time of harvest. As you shake the tree, basically nuts fall, and that's how they harvest these almonds and pistachios. But of course, as you can imagine, there's a safety issue here. And also, you can impart a lot of damage on the tree if you basically shake it with the different stress levels that you can control. Currently, these are expert operators who are operating, but very few operators are there who have the high level of expertise and experience. There are a lot of this is a recurring theme in many of these specialty crop agricultural workforce. Labor shortage is a problem, but high-skilled labor shortage is even worse of a problem. And so really what we are trying to understand the control, like what happens if you shake the tree at different particular frequencies or different amount of pressure at different parts of the trunk. And then also we need quick way to actually do imaging. So if the shaker is here, the operator is here, and they're pointing a camera or some kind of sensing device there, and you need to come up with a quick estimate of the number of nuts in this tree, which is the yield. right? And then there are so many trees to shake in a particular block. So currently the shakers, they go to one row of trees, shake what tree after tree after tree. They keep a budget of time saying, okay, I'm going to spend a minute or something like that at every tree, see how much ever falls and keep moving on to the next tree, right? So if you can prioritize based on the estimated yield, this is like counting. And as you can tell, it's not a simple problem of counting here. So there's a lot of these computer vision and control involving a machine and a particular tree right here. We believe that this is actually more close to automation as opposed to a couple of other tasks, which is like, let's say apple tree. What you see here is a worker actually at the start of spring, as the flowers are budding in an apple tree, they are thinning the blossoms. If you have an apple tree in your home or a backyard, it's better to actually take some of the flowers away so that the energy goes into actually not maximizing the yield, but actually producing the best quality of the fruit too. So this is the way in which they manage the crop load on a particular tree. Because the workers here are doing this manually, right? I mean, they're climbing up these really ladders, and the ground is anything but flat. So this requires basically automation, but it's not easily to automate at all. The other challenge is pruning of branches. This happens in the winter time, not even in the springtime. Most of the branches need to be pruned post harvest so that the tree gets ready for the next season. This requires understanding tree structure and the horticulture and like of the underlying fruit, where the fruits are going to appear and where the flowers are going to appear. We don't want to be pruning the wrong branches at the wrong places. So building 3D models where we can actually understand the architecture of the plant. There are freestanding varieties, there are vertical standing varieties, which are easier to model. So they're like different kinds of tree architectures, right? And so again, as you can imagine, all these problems, they have a host of computer vision and knowing embedding some of the knowledge of science to the extent that's there into the decision-making process. And from the AI side, what makes these problems harder is really when you prune a branch, for example, you don't know the reward right away. It's not like reinforcement learning where you take an action and then it tells you what the reward is, right? So you have to wait until the end of the season really to understand how much of these decisions actually like what it meant actually in terms of the yield. But yield is not the only constraint, the thing that we are interested in. Labor. So if the trees, if you prune the branches the right way, it makes it easier for harvest to happen at the end of the season, which means that you can, with small amount of labor, you can still pick more fruits. So these kinds of decisions are really important, made well ahead in the season. And how do you actually relate it to something, the outcome which is not readily visible? And there is very little training data here. So going to look at all these small data problems, small labels, there's a lot of samples for us. Each tree is a sample for us, right? But you have only limited capacity to go and experiment in these farms. And so really the techniques that we develop have to be really robust. And they need to they have to figure out how to work with small data and so on. Yes, Raghu, yeah.
So, this may or may not be very relevant, but let me just offer this to you. Do you know about this work called Algorithmic Beauty of Plants by, this professor? I think he's retired now, at University of Calgary. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful books that somebody wrote about plants. So he talks about generative models, essentially, right? So essentially using grammars, right? So, so you could say that, hey, a tree has a root, then, it forks up children. And I mean, it's beautiful stuff, right? Context free, context sensitive. So if you want, I'll send you the link. Okay. It's a quick, a quick comment. The other is like going back to, let's say the vision aspect and maybe the control aspect, right? So, I mean, like in our world, right, we look at crop diseases. So, yes, we look for certain, I guess, harbingers, right? Harbingers of disease. So, if you were to build essentially a machine vision, system, there has to be some definition of thinning, right? What does blossom thinning means, right? Is that well understood in the horticultural community?
Yeah, so I think there's a very good understanding in terms of the horticultural aspect of how which flowers to thin, where to thin, because these are usually cluster fruits, and you want to be picking out the right flowers within a cluster and not destroy the cluster in the process, right? So there is a good amount of understanding in the science of things, but they're not necessarily the models that you would want, that you would envision, right? So for cold hardiness, like the frost mitigation aspect, actually there are some models that we could start with as baselines, and we actually improve those models using neural networks and so on. But for these things, it's not really these models of saying, okay, if the cluster has these many flowers, or if the flowers look like this, then go after these kinds of. So it's not as easy to translate them. So that's actually one of our harder tasks at this moment, where we are trying to actually understand how an expert pruner or an expert thinner would knowing the knowing the horticultural aspects of the plant, and then encode that in the form of knowledge that basically our AI designers can use. And that's why I would like to say that this is actually AI in the loop helping the humans at the end of the day. I don't think there is some robotic pruners that are available. Our lab, one of our labs at Crosser, they actually have automated pruning. There's also automated thinning to an extent possible, but this is by and large the lab environment, right? I mean, there's very few things of AI operating in the wild type of thing. So really understanding the human AI workflows and let the humans do the work, right? But figure out, give them a guide on how best to do it. And if I'm a low-trained, low-skilled worker going to the farm, and if I can put a smartphone in front, and basically that tells you, okay, these are the branches that you might want to prune, on an expert pruner would have likely to have pruned, and these are the places that they would have pruned, then it actually solves two problems. One is, the low-skilled worker is still able to perform the action without really having to get trained. The other thing is that they also learn along the way. So AI can be as a medium here, right? So I think the harder problem for us is to really distill out the knowledge that the growers of the workforce has in the form of usable models, and then build on those models to using data to actually provide decision support.
So one last question, and I'll stop. Okay. So are these are there when somebody engages, let's say in blossom thinning, are these listed as a bunch of steps, right? Hey, you got to do this, you got to do this. It's almost like a decision tree. Is that usually the way it's written?
I think it's fair to say, yeah, I don't know how much of a stepwise thing, but there are guidelines. If you talk to an expert, they will tell you, okay, look at the branch, or look at where the cluster is located on that, and you should prune to this much. So there are some rules, loosely formulated rules that they can provide you.
Okay. Then I think it could be, prone to automation. We can talk later. There's something I'm quite interested in. I'll reach out to you separately.
Absolutely. Okay, so this is great. I don't have to cover all the slides here, so I don't have to like I said, it can be more discussion oriented like it is right now. I've already touched upon a lot of the AI issues, but I want to at least summarize some of them. Basically, we have real-world AI systems that we need to build. They need to operate in uncertain wild environments. Data is limited, especially label data is very hard to get in the space. There is some sampling that people have done. In fact, farms, they go and collect samples to ground. It can be used to ground the models, the prediction models, but they are irregularly sampled. Sampling, how much to sample, at what temporal scale should I sample, is not really a well-studied problem here. If I want to go and find out how many fruits are there, or how many, what is how mature are these flowers at any given point of time, these are all basically just sampling done at an irregular rate right now. correlations could be there. All these are multivariable problems, number of variables, and there might be some correlated variables. So understanding correlation and hence structure of the data is so important. They operate in non-stationary environments, right? And you need to have a clear understanding of the uncertainty of any kind of prediction task that we have here, because that actually directly relates to the trust that the user would have on the AI system. There's also safety aspects to it and so on. The third is the human challenge, and I didn't actually talk about this as much, but there is actually an active team within our institute looking at human factors and how they can be brought into the AI tools. And this is all about actually understanding the population of like the users. So who are going to use the system, field workers to managers to even policymakers. Policymakers are a bit more on the water side of things. We also have a diversity in problems and then hardware solutions that are used, right? So knowing these, and not just knowing, but actually incorporating knowledge obtained from these is actually a research problem in itself. We in fact have what are called learning circles, where we send our teams to different farms and talk to different groups of growers and on a repeated basis, on a recurring basis, to get more and more information. So let me I don't know, maybe in the 5-10 minutes, I'll rush through some concepts, and I'm okay sticking around for a few more minutes after 10, if that works for you, until 10:15. But I don't know, is there any time constraint, Raghu, for?
No, I think we are fine. Yeah, as long as you're okay with that.
Yeah. So I can stay until 10:15 or so my time. That's not a problem. So let me go through what I can in the like give you 1 or 2 examples, sample problems. So I talked about water, but here is one system that people use. This is called Big Crops. These are 2 different models actually. This is a lot more on the biophysical modeling side, right? I mean, what is the water intake, precipitation, irrigation, all these things for a plant, and how does the plant respond in terms of transpiration, yield, biomass, and all that stuff, right? That's the crop system. So there is a small group, and this is actually, an active area of research in the biophysical modeling community to understand how water intake happens to a plant and how the crop responds. And there are different types of model. There's a coupling of these models that are required. But this is actually at a micro level on a plant, right? At a plant scale. At the regional scale, there are a lot of intermediate processes that we really have to understand. So for example, one problem that we are looking at is really the snow updates, predicting the snow updates in the season. So if you see, starting from like the January day by day, you want, or if you say January and February, and for every month, you need to know when the snow on the ground will completely melt. That's feeding into a particular watershed. And that prediction problem is not actually that simple. So there's observations, monitors, which you could use to actually compute your loss functions of your prediction model. But the snow updates, they are like, the current models are not accurate. In fact, sometimes they over-predict. There are also curves that they under-predict. So how do you use data here? Whatever data is available, one of them being satellite imagery. There's a lot of satellite images that are available, and Landsat and so on. So can you use them to augment what you get from the farms, from near the watersheds where the sensors are located, in order to better predict the snow update? And that's so important, because then you could tell how much, when the water supply diminishes, and at what point basically you can be able to forecast the water availability from there on in a more predictable manner. What we are using that is to understand how farmers fallow their lands. Fallowing basically means this is a drought response problem. Drought is a very recurring problem, right? So we are trying to understand, okay, so if you look at all the areas which are drought prone ahead of time in the season, can we predict land use patterns in that season of how different farmers would actually either fallow, or how likely they are to fallow their land? Fallow basically means they don't grow, or they water less and keep the bare minimum operations going so that they can move the operations more towards the next year, right? So agricultural land use modeling problem basically is one focused project that we are looking at, which requires us understanding the water supply ahead of time, how much water would be available at the start of the season. Also, it requires us to understand human behavior because land use patterns are really dictated by humans. So this problem actually feeds nicely into a graph network, neural network type of formulation. So if you think about it, every farm is a node. You can connect the farms to their neighboring farms using edges. There are watersheds. And so really it's like multiple farms within the same watershed, and some farms could be located in multiple watersheds. So you basically have a hypergraph here where you could, and then we need to understand how the hypergraph, which is spatiotemporal, how it evolves over time, and that's like a spatiotemporal GNN at hypergraph level, right? So that's really the nature of the problem here. Once you do that for fallowing, you can also do something similar for understanding the stream flows, how much water is flowing through these stream pathways. And because this is all these, understanding how much flow is there in a particular segment of water is how the farmers are going to actually figure out how, like on the consumptive side, right? They are drawing water from these channels and so on. So they need, like, the decisions will be made out of how much flow will be available at what time of the year. And the sooner and the earlier you can predict these tasks ahead of time. So these are two example predictive tasks that we have. And both of them use GNNs. There's a little bit of agent-based modeling. There's also some amount of science-guided machine learning, which we need to really understand, like some constraints, right? Mainly to talk about constraints of the system where, like, water needs to be conserved to start with, right? The ins equals out. There might be some attrition or loss of water along the way that needs to be captured within the model so that the conserved property is still maintained. So some science-guided machine learning is also important in these cases. One interesting problem here is actually there's this endemic cycle. So if you make a forecast and the human behavior will use the forecast and the behavior changes, adapts, right? A farmer knows, okay, if you tell a farmer saying, okay, in this particular water district, this much water is going to be available in the month of March and month of April, their use or projected use and planned use also will change. And now you have to update your predictions based on that, a forecast based on that, right? So there is that cycle here. And so what we want to do is make that cycle a bit tighter to the extent possible where it doesn't change much. So that's one, like the prediction task wise using GNNs and agent-based modeling and science-guided ML. That's one project we have. So on the farm side, I talked about cold hardiness. So let me briefly tell you where the data is coming from. We have a lot of weather stations. They actually monitor, this is like an example weather station located right in the farm. And it is basically measuring microclimate, all sorts of temperature, any kind of humidity, and so on. There's also soil sensors. There are also drones flying over these farms, which actually capture canopy vigor and how much transpiration rate is happening and things like that. There's stationary sensors and mobile sensors. So all that is data for us, right? Using that, we are supposed to predict a phenomenon. Like in this case, cold hardiness. Cold hardiness is basically, it looks like this. Start of the season, maybe from around September time to the April-May time. That's really the time window that we focus on more when it comes to cold hardiness. Then summer doesn't matter much. There we talk about heat stress, right? So the hardiness of a crop, the plant actually adapts. So you can basically plot the hardiness of a crop. It becomes hardier and hardier as the winter progresses. So it acclimatizes to winter, and then it starts to de-acclimatize in the springtime. And that's when the flowering happens. The plant sends signals and saying, oh, it's time for it to start flowering. Now, weather fluctuations can be a lot more important when the flowering is actually happening or about to happen. A plant has started its flowering mechanism, and there is a frost happens, and then the plant, there might be a lot of damage there, right? Because the plant has already triggered its flowering mechanism and so on. So this is really the overall structure of the curve that we would like to predict the best we can. And this curve changes by the different varieties, right? So there's like even grapes, there are like 30 some varieties that are grown here. This curve looks different for each of those varieties. And there's not data available. So we have mostly predicted curve, model predicted curve is what is available. However, we have groups which are going and sampling every 2 weeks. What is the actual cold hardiness, like how much damage could be incurred if the temperature drops below that particular threshold at once every 2 weeks. So, that is really the input model. So the underlying question here is, can we predict this? I'll rush a little bit here, but this is the state of the art model of, at least for wine grapes. It's called the Ferguson model, developed more than 10 years back. And you can think of it as a simple decoder-encoder function. You encode the daily temperature, and it's like a Markov process where you'd say, okay, so the current today's temperature versus the difference from the yesterday's temperature will tell you how the plant is going to develop its hardiness level. So so if it's more, or if it's less, and if there are some thresholds that are used, and then based on that, the plant goes into acclimatation mode or de-acclimatation mode, and then the hardiness value is what comes out, right? So you can think of it as encoder, and then the decoder tells you what is the hardiness on a daily basis, right? This is like a recurrent form. So the simplest thing you can do here is simply replace these science models using neural networks, right? And then what you do is you plug in a whole bunch of weather features, whatever you have from the sensors here, and let the neural network figure out how to weight these, and essentially come up with better, more precise hardiness values. There are different kinds of RNN. Recurrent neural networks will be the most useful here, but there are different architectures that we could try there. Our group actually had this study, Alan Fern and team at Oregon State. They did a lot of, they tried different architectures, and they were able to predict things that are very close. The red dots are, the blue line is the actual predicted value, and the red curve is LTE 50. And so these numbers actually indicate, this is the lethal temperature thresholds. So LTE 90 basically means that temperature, 90% of the buds or flowers will die, right? So it's the more this number, the more the damages, and we want to be, it depends on what the farmers need, right? Some farmers they would be interested in knowing the LT 50, where they can at least sustain 50% of the flowers, and here 90 would mean they only sustain 10% of the flowers, right? So getting close to the actuals is so important here, and actually RNNs worked pretty well for these. There is also a problem which has to do with multitask learning here. There are multiple different cultivars or wine grape varieties here. Can you use data from one cultivar or one variety to actually help us predict cold hardiness values for other cultivars for which we may not have much data, right? And that's something that the team is actively working on. I think what we're finding is basically this multitask learning is a very useful technique from the applied to recurrent neural networks, and they can be used for a number of these kinds of tasks. The team also worked on predicting when a bud would actually break, and this is the bud break time. This is what you see is, this is the time, like early spring, when the buds start to emerge. The buds are always there. It's just that they'll start to flower at this time, right? So it's basically the probability of when you're likely to see. And our model was predicting on a daily basis, and then the probability, as you can see, went up, and then it dropped down, and then it started to emerge again. And it turns out actually, the April of this year, we had a cold spell. And so the model thought it was like 20% probability of plants starting to break. And then rightly so, when the cold spell happens, basically the probability dropped again. So this is what the plant has to go through, right? It has to learn, it has to sense the environment and respond, whether should it actually actively turn on the budding process, or should it wait, right? And we were able to actually predict, this is the time, this dotted line here tells you when the actual budding happened in most of the farms that we are studying here. So we were basically very close to what the actual bud break time was. You could also model this as a structural discovery problem. Like there's like 30 years of data available to us. Some of them have more samples collected, so we have more ground truth information, but at the least we have model predicted values. There are about 30 wine grape varieties, different locations basically. So there is a lot of multidimensional point clouds that are available, spatiotemporal. Can we actually use techniques from topology to understand the structure of the data, and hence, and through that, understand how different varieties are related to one another, or how two different seasons, even though they may have been at completely two different decades, how one season looked very similar to the other season, so that I can then start, hopefully, like think of it as a nearest neighbor based decisions. So my current season looks like 2003, whatever decisions worked in 2003 hopefully can be adopted here, right? So you could think of basically relating season across seasons, relating across these different cultivars, and we are using different kinds of topological techniques. I won't go into the details, but basically, mapper, persistence homology, these are techniques that we are actively developing. I think my student put together a short video on this, but I think it's nothing fancy here. But yeah, so what we get out at the end is basically we can generate barcodes for different varieties, and then we can say, okay, how do these barcodes compare? Because these are multidimensional point clouds. Barcodes provide a summarized view of the data, right? And then if you can compare the different varieties using their barcodes, or if you compare two different seasons through the barcodes, then you can come up with understanding the historical data sets that are available to us. How that could help prediction tasks going forward is those relations can be embedded as part of a training, right? So you can say, okay, this particular, you have a task vector or something that's associated with these multitask learning approaches. So can you embed the relationships between two different cultivars so that the neural network figures out how to weight those accordingly? So somewhat semi-supervised way to actually improve the prediction. These models, these kinds of topological techniques also are helping us figuring out what is the right sample, how frequently should I sample, at what time. Like I said, currently the approach is the field workers, they go and like sample once every 2 weeks. They sample buds from some 20 different plants or 30 different plants in a given farm once every 2 weeks. But actually the sampling frequency matters, and in some part of the year, obviously you need to sample more than the others, right? So this is telling us, okay, there's a lot more variations happening around this time, so sample at a higher frequency, or otherwise you'll be losing information. Whereas a lot more steady grouping happening in this around this time, so maybe not, right? So it's helping us understand this right level to sample. So those are some of the projects that I wanted to highlight. I know it's past 10 o'clock here, but I do a few slides on some.
Yeah, please go ahead. I think that's fine. No, this is all really wonderful. Yeah, I think there's a lot. DK has been texting me, so I think there's a lot to talk about. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not touch on the labor automation part.
Yes,
I talked a little bit of water. I talked a little bit of farm intelligence. The labor part is something I didn't even. I just briefly mentioned a few tasks like pruning and thinning and things like that. Just wanted to mention that that's there, right? So how we are going about working on development process. What we are doing essentially is we have small groups of AI researchers. And there is a human AI team, and the human AI team is actually helping facilitating interviews with different kinds of, I don't want to call them users, but certainly growers and workforce and policymakers, and learning from that and gathering knowledge. And then that is feeding back into the AI team, right? And so we know the practical considerations, and that needs to be part of our models. The hope is basically, this is the phase we are at right now. The hope is basically take these learning circles and graduate them to an early adopted network, and hopefully that will help us actually with the adoption itself. The thing about the specialty crop industry here on the West Coast, and slightly different from how it is in the Midwest with respect to these row crops, is that we don't have really large growers, like we don't have the Monsantos and Caterpillars and Pioneers and so on. We have a lot of small scale growers, right? And so really that network is so important. Word passes, word of mouth, a lot of things go word of mouth. And so we have to really work closely with this group to affect any kind of change. We have the backing of the tree fruit industry and the nut trees industry and so on. And those commissions basically help us. There's a good extension mechanism where we can reach out to the growers, but we need a few champion growers to champion the AI and the role of technology. And there are a lot of progressive technology-wise, there are a lot of progressive growers in this particular community, and so they're willing to try things out. They have say, okay, here is one block, you can work, make it a smart orchard, and you can tell us what you want, right? What you see from that. So we are actually developing a demo farm. We call it a demo farm. Basically, it's you can think of it as different parts of the farm, which grows different fruits or different systems. And then we are trying to do different things, all these controls that I talked about, right? Ideally, I would like to change, like not just predict, but also do something with that thing on the farm. So like if you want to irrigate, we want to really effectively say how much to irrigate what part of the block. Similar thing with frost, like we talked about wind machines and we talked about other kinds of heating or irrigation. How much should the settings be? We want that control feedback completed. And so we are trying this out with some of the cropping systems that we have in our demo farm. We are instrumenting those farms, we are collecting data, so we will know how to complete that cycle. Same thing with labor also, this pruning and thinning and so on. So we have some automated harvest tools with apple picking and so on. What you see here in the middle is actually a robotic pruner. This goes and pictures the clusters of flowers and figures out which part of the cluster it should pluck and all that, right? And this is actually a more controlled environment, and you can do this for pruning also, right? So the overall workflow that we have is really from the demo farm, at least. We have a couple of commercial growers also who have given us some space to experiment. So from these farms, we collect data, send it to the cloud, and basically get it, get data visualized so we can figure out all these different things. We would like to have an orchard view, and then a block view, and then a tree view, different scales, right? And then we have some real-time videos that either the drones are picking up or the tractors as they go through the farms are picking up. So all these will be made available in this demo farm in a control center that we have near the farm. And then that will be used for delivering decisions back to the demo farm. So this is the work aspect of it, right? Yeah, so I listed a few things. This is my last slide. So in terms of techniques, there are more on the imaging side. Definitely, I did not touch upon many of them, but I did talk about spatiotemporal GNNs, neural networks in general, multitask learning, science-guided machine learning, topological data analysis. All these have plenty of applications in this space. Agent-based modeling, AI techniques developed, improved AI techniques, but these techniques should be able to work on smaller amount of data. And that's why these synthetic data generation, you talked of generative models. That's one way to look at digital twins. You can also augment for lack of data through synthetic models to generate data. And then that could also help us do a lot of what if scenarios. Because if you have a particular way of pruning branches applied to this block of trees, and you basically do that for a digital twin and see what happens, how the plant shapes up towards the end, and basically figure out what the impact of those decisions were. That could be one way to use it. Another way is actually in the water scale too, right? At the regional scale, we want to know, like with these inputs, what the overall output should be. But those need to be grounded in what really happens. It needs to kind of capture the structure of the actual landscape. So hence, not just a simulation, but also a digital twin. I think that's really important in the space. and we are heading in that direction. I think there could be, there's a lot of competition here that will also need some HPC. There's satellite imagery, there's climate modeling, and at the end of the day, real-time decision support, right? And so that needs to be a very seamless workflow where a worker can go, like I said, it basically does compute on the edge by looking at what the architecture of a plant is and branches are, and figure out where to prune or where to thin, how to shake a tree. All these things have to happen basically in real time for us, right? And on a daily basis, frost mitigation and things like that. So those are all the problems that I touched upon, and we also can possibly work on some educational elements. We do have hackathons. There's one coming up in January. And also we have any kind of CI workflows for use-inspired AI. I think will be a good way to talk about the student exchanges and so on. So with that, I'll stop here, and I'll thank you, for the time. So I'll take more questions.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. Among those who are still left, do you have any questions for Dr. Kalyanaraman? Yeah.
I think there was a question from Chris. If you can point us to some of your institute publications, we would like to take a look at that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
right. I think before you left. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
right, please.
Yeah, I'll definitely maybe send an email or something as a follow-up to it. But yeah, we do have a number of manuscripts under review right now.
Okay.
And so that's why I present actually most of the work that I presented in terms of the automated pruning, automated thinning. There's already plenty of papers that are group, so many members of published there. But the AI side of things, where new development is happening, is what is currently under review, right? So the team has plenty of bench strength, and I'm talking of a lot of these topics have been worked on for decades, right? They're not new. What is new is how to use data, how to use that kind of thing. So yeah, so I'll be glad to share papers after the talk.
Thank you.
That would be wonderful. Any other questions from anybody? I do have one question, so I'm going to wait till others chime in. Yeah. Okay, if not, then let me just propose something to you, Ananth. So, for example, we talk about data, right, and that's a big problem in almost every domain, right? We can think of, right. So, one of the things that that people are looking at is like this whole notion of weak labels, right? Don't really look at an object, let's say in your case a tree, or maybe birds and so on, right, in its entirety, but look at a collection of them and just give it one label, right? And this happens a lot in let's say grading of cancers, right? You look at a very large image, it's usually HND stained histopathology image, and just give it one grade, right? And because it's really hard for pathologists to go and very much annotate different regions, so they normally give one grade. But there are newer techniques now which basically say, hey, we can certainly use even that information, right, to perhaps do a better job of predicting and prognostication and so on, and also there might be even ideas about how to judge strength of labels, right? Weak labels versus very strong labels. If you sit down and annotate, to death, okay, then you have a very strong label, because like if you look at a human, right, man, woman, right, just give that label, right? You get some, essentially you do get a classification. But if I start giving more morphometric features, right, measurements, I do a really good job, right? I can even say what ethnicity and so on and so forth. I think that's looks like there could be one is model building, which is really important, but I would also submit that there are all these so-called data programming, right? So there Christopher Ree at Stanford, looks into these kind of techniques. Yet another person in IIT Bombay, and Ganesh Krishnan does that. So I did not really think of it in a formal way, but I've been doing something similar in my own crazy way, and many others, right? So thinking like, model building is hard. Okay, and there are hundreds of models already, right? Why not actually make it all about data and data programming, right? So that's something, I just want you to consider. And I'm very interested in some of the automation aspects. If you're interested, I would like to talk, but DK has really wanted us to reach out. We should definitely have one more deep dive, right? Where you also listen to what we've been doing, right? In digital agriculture and ICICLE, per se, and then see, how we could build bridges, right? You can certainly do it before, the sale meeting, or we could do it after sale, or during sale, right? Certainly we can find a place to to congregate and discuss. So I think we have, I think DK, myself, and I'm sure many others, Nilima, will be very interested in furthering this conversation.
Okay, great, wonderful. Yeah, so I want to learn more on the ICICLE things, what's happening, right? So what you're more interested in few years, and see where that would lend itself to nice collaboration. So maybe a reciprocal invited talk would be very good, very useful. So Raghu, either you or DK, whoever you think would be the right person, I think we should arrange for a talk or seminar. And we can follow this up by email. Maybe
absolutely.
First week of December is a possibility. We can, so that when we meet at sale, we can actually have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think that will be wonderful. So well, certainly, Nilima and I will talk to DK, and then we can plan a reciprocal talk, right? DK should be there, I think, as a PI, but maybe some of us can join him, right? Myself or Chris and others, and then at the same time, we should have, maybe after listening to the talk, or we have a follow-up meeting on how we can join forces, right? And so on and so forth. That would be wonderful. Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of synergy, and I think what I found at least interesting, very appealing, actually, not even interesting, but appealing, is the rigor. You're bringing in a lot of rigor, right? Which I think is very important. So when you talk about hardiness, right? Cold hardiness, and you're defining it, right? To me, that's a control variable, right? So and it seems like it's a well accepted, robust control variable, right? So I think there's a lot of this is amazing talk. Really enjoyed it, and sorry, we're a little delayed in starting, and I apologize.
It's a good idea. So yeah, thank you so much for hosting, and we'll follow up by email. Okay.
Thank you, Ananth.
Okay,
have a
sounds
nice
good,
day.
Ananth. Yeah, have a rest of the day. Good rest of the day. Yeah,
Yeah,
bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nilima. Bye.